Side 6, Objective Bajor, by John Peel. Continuing on page 204. The ex-rebel's fingers closed about Jarrow's wrist and jerked the blaster upward. At the same time, Shakar delivered a sharp blow to the base of Jarrow's neck. With a grunt of shock and pain, Jarrow released his blaster and fell forward across the conference table. Shakar picked up the blaster and then threw it into the nearest trash receptacle. "The aliens are here as diplomatic envoys," he growled as Jarrow attempted to stand. "Your behavior is disgusting, and I will not tolerate it." Jarrow finally managed to straighten up, massaging his neck. "You'll pay for that," he hissed. "Oh, come now," Shakar retorted. "Can't you manage anything better than hollow threats? I've had enough of you for now. I think you'd better leave." He stared pointedly at the door. Limping, Jarrow glared at the First Minister. "You'll regret this," he said. "If we had held them hostage, we might have saved Bajor." "Do you really think that the Hive would have called off their plans because of 2 small hostages?" asked Shakar. "Don't be absurd. And even if they would, we would not dishonor ourselves in such a fashion." Dax stepped up to Sana. "Tork asked if we wouldn't do anything to save our worlds. Well, now you can tell him that there's one thing we won't do. We won't break our word." Sana nodded. "You have acted honorably," she admitted. "I do not care what the Hive Masters say. The Bajorans are not insane. I may not be able to understand their love for this dirt they insist on calling home, but I can see it does not affect their integrity or their courage." "This meeting is now closed," Shakar announced. "I am saddened that we did not reach a compromise, Sana, but this situation has obviously gone too far for that. You must forgive me, but I am forced to prepare for war with your people." Sana inclined her head. "For what it is worth," she said gravely, "my sympathies are with you." She turned to Sisko. "I release you from your oath, Captain. I shall not be returning to the Hive." Sisko frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I will stay here, on Bajor, of my own free will." Sana gave him a level look. "I may not understand these people, but I truly sympathize with them. Bajor deserves to survive, and if the Hive is going to destroy it, then they will have to kill me to do so." She turned to Shakar. "I regret I can do nothing positive to aid your people, but I will not harm you either. I shall be here with you when the Hive arrives." Kira shook her head. "That's very noble and brave of you, Sana," she said, "and very stupid. You can do no good by throwing away your life like this." "On the contrary," Sana answered, "I can set an example to my fellows on the Hive. I believe the decision to absorb Bajor is abhorrent, and I protest that decision with my life. There is no point in arguing with me. My mind is made up." "And what about Tork?" asked Sisko gently. "How do you think he's going to take your decision?" Sana shrugged. "He will hate it, Captain," she admitted. "But he will not change my mind." She smiled. "It may give him added incentive to discover a solution to this problem." "Or it might just drive him crazy," Dax added. "I do what I must," Sana replied. "I can do no other." Shakar moved to join them. "I thank you for your gesture of support," he told her. "I would be honored to have you be my guest for as long as is necessary." "Thank you." Sana gazed down at the curled-up Tork. "I must wait here until Tork recovers to tell him of my decision. Then I will be happy to join you." Sisko collapsed into his chair. "This is crazy," he muttered. Sana was willing to die for her beliefs, as were the entire Bajoran people, and Tork seemed convinced that there was no way to resolve this peacefully. What other options were left to them now? And how much longer did they have to explore those options? Boran strode into the master's chambers, a delighted smile on his face. "Good news," he announced. "The servitors will be finished with their tasks in less than 1 day now. We are ready to begin shifting the population." "Excellent." Dron rose to his feet. "You and your crew have worked wonders, Boran. You are all to be highly commended." He looked at the remaining Hive masters in the room. Raldar was missing. Dron judged it best that he stay out of sight for a while. And Tork was with the aliens still. Otherwise, everyone was now present. "Makon, your report?" The science master rose to his feet. "The, special determination has been made, and the results are awaiting your command to be fed to everyone's comps, Grandmaster. The population has been divided into half, and reassigned their new spaces." "Excellent," Dron nodded. "Then immediately following this meeting, you will transmit the information. Splitting will commence immediately. Everyone will move quickly and efficiently to their new posts in preparation for the schism. Now, for the matter that will most concern us." He moved his own comp to the table before him. "I have made a separate determination to sort out our assignments to each hive. I will remain Grand Master of this hive, of course. Pakat, you will become the new Grand Master of the second hive." Pakat looked astonished and startled, as well as pleased. "Thank you, Grand Master," he exclaimed. "It is an honor I did not expect." "But one that you well deserve," Dron informed him. There was a murmur of assent from around the table, one that Hosea rather obviously did not join. "With you on the new hive will be Primon and Makon. All 3 of your subordinates will become your replacement masters for this hive. Boran and Raldar will remain with me on this hive, and their understudies will become the new masters of industry and security for your hive." "I had thought," Hosea commented, "that hive masters were determined, not appointed. Yet you are promoting underlings who have not been determined to positions of power. Others might see this as a despotic move, you know." "It is nothing of the kind," snapped Dron, irritated. "These are extraordinary times in which we live. The great design is being implemented. We do not have time to go through the determination to see who is best qualified for the posts. We may find ourselves at war with these crazed aliens shortly, and we must be prepared. This is a one-time-only measure to ensure we are not caught unprepared." "And what of me?" asked Hosea dryly. "Am I to be split down the middle, perhaps, and assigned to both hives?" "I wish that we could split you down the middle," Dron said with utter sincerity. "We could both use your wisdom," he added, lying. "You will, however, become advisor to Pakat on the new hive. I suspect he will have great need of your keen mind there." "And you will be most pleased not to have it here, I warrant," Hosea answered. He tapped on the table with his fingers and then smiled. "I note that you have not commented on where Tork is to be assigned. Have you given him up for lost?" "No," Dron lied. "I merely saw no need to speak of him since he was not present. However, since you wish to know, he will remain here on this hive." Hosea nodded. "I hope you find work for him," he jibed. "Otherwise he might get bored. And bored hands seek out trouble, as the writings say." He pretended to frown. "Or do they? Tork seems to think that the writings have a few glitches in them." "If he does," Boran said firmly, "he should be soundly disciplined. The writings are without error." "Quite," agreed Dron. "We all know that." "Yes," said Hosea in his dry way. "It appears that we do." He smiled blandly about the table. "Now," said Dron, "the hour of our destiny has come. Makon, send the signal to begin. We will prepare to become 2 hives. The great design advances. We are all privileged to live in these exciting times." It was quiet now in the council chambers. All of the Bajorans had left, including Kira, who was getting updated on the status of the defensive forces. Only Dax, Sana, and the still comatose Tork were left with Sisko, and none of them felt much like talking. Sana was watching and waiting beside the curled-up Tork. Sisko stared out of the large window as the storm raged above the city. It seemed an appropriate omen for the struggle inside him. He couldn't see a way out of this problem, yet he knew that it was up to him to do something. Why me, he wondered. Why am I always seen as the one who fits all their prophecies and has to save the day? How could he be expected to pull a solution to this mess from thin air? And yet, this was what he was trained to do. By joining Starfleet in the first place, he'd put his life and abilities on the line. It was his responsibility to do the impossible, or at the very least, to attempt it. There had to be a way out, something he could do. He couldn't simply wait for Bajor to be annihilated. The only other option was to attack the Hive and attempt to destroy it. Either way, he was talking genocide. That was not an option he considered viable, either as a part of his personal philosophy or as a Starfleet directive. That meant he simply had to find another option. Options. Dax, he called quietly. We need to talk. Of course, Benjamin. She crossed to join him. What is it? The Hive needs resources to live, he said slowly. Primarily, it appears, they need food plants and other botanical goods that can only be obtained from a living planet. Is there any way we could bring them the living materials that they need? They could then simply take apart barren planets for their mineral requirements. Perhaps, Dax answered dubiously, but we'd need a huge amount of such supplies to stock 2 hives. It would take months, and perhaps even a year, to assemble sufficient resources. From everything that's been said so far, I gather the Hive's needs are a lot more urgent than that. I don't think they'd agree to hold off that long. Sisko sighed. You're probably right. But work up a proposal, will you, and see just how feasible it is. And any other options that you can come up with that might give us some time to come up with a better suggestion. Of course, Benjamin. Dax returned to her work with the tricorder. A jagged, searing flash of lightning lit the sky. Sisko started counting without thinking, and on 3 the roll of thunder came, rattling the glass in front of him. Some storm. At least it provided a little distraction. There was a gentle rap on the door. Sisko was half annoyed at the interruption, and half pleased to be dragged out of his morbid thoughts. Come, he called. The tall figure of Yarka entered the room. He looked tired and haggard, which was hardly surprising. Emissary, he said by way of greeting. I hope that you have had better ideas from meditating on the words of the prophets than I have. Sisko laughed sourly. Hardly. I don't have an idea in my head, Vedic. I wish that I did, but I keep coming up empty. Yarka moved closer. You will know the way, he said. You are the one who protects us. He sounded absolutely convinced of this. Emissary, surely there is no coincidence here in the fact that there are 2 aliens with you. 2 shall convert, Sisko murmured, quoting the words of Andaki that he had heard earlier. A vague hope started to enter his mind. Sana has declared her stand for your people, but Tork hasn't, and can't. Perhaps he will when he recovers, suggested Yarka. Even if he does, Sisko pointed out, it means very little. What can the 2 of them do to help us? I don't think that the Hive will stop because they ask it to. The prophets have spoken, Yarka said with simple faith. As to what they mean, I cannot say. I am only a Vedic. You are the emissary, so perhaps their truth will become clear to you soon. Clear? Sisko laughed ironically and gestured at the storm outside. Everything's as hazy to me as those clouds. But beyond the haze there is light, Yarka pointed out. It is a matter of seeing past the obvious, that is all. I wish that I had your faith, Yarka, Sisko said. Peace, said Sana suddenly. She looked around. Tork is recovering. Peering down, Sisko saw that there was indeed a crack in Tork's armor as he started to unroll himself. A moment later, the shaken Hive Master staggered to his feet. He glanced outside the window at the continuing storm and shuddered. I am sorry for my behavior, he said, but it became too much for me. You've been very brave, Sisko told him. I'm amazed at what you've been able to do. It simply isn't enough, though. Tork nodded. I know. It seems that I have sorely misjudged matters. The Bajorans will not give up their world, will they? Never, said Yarka fervently. It is our home, the home that the prophets have given us. Their light will surely illumine your soul, and you will change as your companion has changed. Change? Tork was confused. What do you mean? Sana stroked his shell tenderly. Beloved, I have made a decision. I will remain here on Bajor and not return to the Hive with you. Blinking, Tork struggled to understand. Why? He asked. You cannot be serious. Bajor is to be absorbed. I know. Sana bowed her head. It is an immoral act, one that I cannot be a part of and be true to my conscience. I will therefore stay and die with the Bajorans. No, Tork whispered. Sana, we are to be one. You cannot abandon me now. I must do what I feel is right, she replied. Tork, look to your hearts. Do you not feel as I do? That it is more important to be true to your beliefs than to live? Of course, Tork admitted. But that is different. It is no different, Sana replied. I will not be a part of the death of any Bajoran. I will die first. She relented slightly. Beloved, I am not trying to force you to make the same decision, but I can do nothing else. Tork was clearly in pain. How can I abandon you? He asked. Especially when it would mean your death. He clutched at his head with his hands. I do not know what to think, what to believe. That is because you have no faith, Yarka said urgently. When you rely only upon yourself, you have nothing to fall back upon when your strength fails. We have our faith in the words of the prophets to uphold us when we would fall. They have promised us a savior at this time of crisis, and I begin to believe that savior might be you. Me? Tork stared at him in bewilderment. I do not see how I can help anyone. My one-to-be has told me she wishes to remain here and die. I do not approve of what the Hive is to do, but I cannot stop it. And I am filled with fear of your world. Friend, there is no one who could help you less than I. That is because you are thinking only of your own strength, Yarka answered. Again, I tell you, you need a better strength to rely on. I do not know these prophets of whom you speak. How can I then accept them or believe in them? And then the answer came to Sisko. It was suddenly formed within his mind, almost as if the prophets had placed it there. Then you must meet the prophets, he said firmly. That is the answer. What? Tork stared at him as if he were crazy. This man speaks of a religious experience. You cannot simply order one when you wish it. Sometimes you can, Sisko replied, feeling more and more certain that he was right. When I first came to Bajor, I didn't believe in the prophets either. Then I had an experience. I'm not sure it was exactly religious, but it cleared away a lot of my own doubts and fears. It enabled me to come to terms with my own soul and to move forward. Perhaps the same will happen to you. Yarka, he turned eagerly to the Vedic. Do you think you can borrow an orb for me? An orb? Yarka raised an eyebrow. It will be difficult, especially at this time of crisis. But who would deny the emissary what he needs? He gave a wide smile. I believe the prophets have revealed their plans to you. He bowed and hurried from the room. Dax had unraveled herself from the computer screen she had been accessing. What are you planning to do, Benjamin? She asked. I aim to take the runabout, Sisko explained, and the orb, and Tork, and then enter the wormhole and see if we can't contact the Celestial Temple. Since I don't have a clue how to resolve this problem, let's see if the prophets will tell Tork how to do it. Do you think it'll work? Dax asked anxiously. It had better, Sisko said. It's the only idea I've had, and I have a good feeling about it. I'm glad to hear that, said Kira from where she stood in the doorway. It might be the last one you'll ever have. I've just received word from DS9. The Hive has split into two, and both of them are under power. Armageddon's heading our way. Chapter 23. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser Charak, Gul Gavron watched the main view screen intently. They were finally closing on the Durain system and should soon be close enough to pick out their target. All vessels to alert, he ordered. Begin powering weapons. Raise shields and prepare for contact. His staff scurried to obey his orders. On his tactical display, he could see the wedge-shaped display that showed all of the other ships under his command. His ultimate hour of glory was about to arrive. He was known for his tremendous victory at Mintos Alpha, but that had been almost 20 years ago. A soldier's reputation was only as good as his latest victory, and he hadn't fought in a campaign in over a decade. His enemies had conspired to keep him out of the lines of action, afraid that he'd become too popular. And now they needed him. All of Cardassia needed him. This alien Hive had targeted their world for destruction, and only he and his fleet stood between them. Perfect. This would be his ultimate hour of glory, and his first step toward becoming Gultar. Kiev was getting senile. Everyone knew that. With a major victory such as this, Gavron would be able to challenge Kiev's standing and assume the mantle. What would make such a triumph even better would be to see the expression on the face of Dukat. It was common knowledge that Dukat believed himself the favorite of Kiev and destined to become the next Gultar. Well, that was about to change. Confirm readiness, he barked. All systems operating at peak efficiency, his aide, Tarvok, reported. Weapons are ready and shields are holding at maximum. He consulted the screen at his elbow. All ships report the same status. Excellent. Gavron's attention went back to the screen. How long until visual? Any moment now, Tarvok said. We're closing on Durain 4. Sensors report 2 large objects almost dead ahead. There was a flash of light toward the upper edge of the screen, and Gavron's eyes focused on it. Seconds later, he could see a vague shape, and a second beyond it. Then the Hive began to take a definite form on the screen. Send a warning, he ordered his communications officer. Tell the aliens that they have 10 time units to surrender, or we shall attack. He knew that this offer would naturally be rejected, but it was a formality he had to follow. A surge of excitement infused his blood. There was no greater joy than that of facing an impending battle. He stared about his bridge, proud of every officer seated at his post. This was the cream of the elite, the best of all the warriors in the 3 fleets. He had hand-picked every one. Each of them would willingly die for either Cardassia or Gavron. Each would fight like a demon to avoid such a death. And there were thousands more like them on the other ships of his armada. 120 warships in all, each of them a lethal hunter. These aliens would never stand a chance. The Hives were now quite distinct. According to his instruments, they were in motion, and already several planetary distances apart. The Cardassian fleet was heading toward the closest, the one that had set its sights on absorbing Cardassia. That aim would soon be dashed. "Keep watching for their ships," Gavron growled at Tarvok. "They're bound to launch soon if they mean to intercept us." Acknowledged. Gavron hunched forward, trying to suppress his excitement. It would not do to be too eager for the carnage that was about to occur. He simply hoped that this would not be too easy a victory. "The aliens have rejected the offer of surrender," the communications officer reported. "Good," Gavron replied. "That means they wish to fight, and we shall show them what it means to fight Cardassians." There was a shout of agreement from everyone on the bridge to that sentiment. Gavron smiled proudly. Soldiers, every one of them, and as eager for the battle as he was himself. "The Hive is launching ships," Tarvok reported. 6 hatches have opened. Targets are emerging. "Excellent." Gavron's eyes burned. "Prepare to engage. The battle is joined." "Do you really think this will work, Benjamin?" asked Dax as she helped him prep the runabout for launching. "The entities in the wormhole don't always communicate, you know." Sisko took the orb case from Yarka and gently placed it in restraints behind the pilot's seat. "They don't usually refuse when an orb is involved, remember. Besides, I have a strong suspicion that the entities want this to happen." "A religious experience?" asked Dax with a slight smile. "A hunch," Sisko answered with a wider one. "This just feels to me to be the right thing to do. If the entities are so concerned with the Bajorans, for whatever their obscure reasons, then they will not allow the Hive to destroy this world." "For what it's worth," Dax said, laying a friendly hand on his arm, "I think you're doing the right thing." Yarka nodded. "It is the will of the prophets," he agreed. "For this Tork to convert, he needs a sign, and the prophets will grant him that sign." He smiled. "Emissary, you will be the instrument of our salvation yet again." "I hope," Sisko added. "Right, that's about it. All I need now is Tork. Where is he?" "Saying goodbye to Sana," Dax replied. "If this doesn't work, the 2 of them may never meet again." "Well, I hate to break up a lover's parting," Sisko told her, "but we'd better be on our way. We don't have very much time. Would you mind asking him to get in here?" Dax nodded. "Good luck, Benjamin." He grinned widely. "Thanks, old man. I'll see you soon." He sat down at the controls and began powering up the systems. He heard Dax leave and realized that Yarka was still there. "Was there something else?" Yarka shook his head. "I merely wished to thank you in advance for your efforts. May the prophets go with you and keep you safe, and may they inspire you both." Then he bowed and left the ship. A moment later, Tork stumbled inside the vessel. "I am sorry if I delayed you, Captain," he said. "I understand." Sisko glanced around. "And I'm sorry to have had to rush you, but the Hives are on the move, and we have very little time left to us now. Make yourself comfortable. I'm going to take the runabout back to the wormhole at maximum thrust. It may get a little rough on you, so be prepared." "Of course, Captain." Tork flopped onto his leaning board. "I am ready." "Good." Sisko turned back to the controls. "Then here we go." The runabout lifted from the roof of the council building and rose slowly into the air. As soon as they were a safe distance up, Sisko kicked in the thrusters, and the vessel shot upward into the billowing storm clouds. Lightning crackled about the craft, as if in omen of what was to come. The shields protected them from strikes, of course, and moments later they were above the clouds and on their way. Sana watched the runabout vanish into the clouds with a heavy shell. She had tried to prepare herself for the thought that she might never again see her beloved Tork, but she knew that no amount of preparation was sufficient. Her heart burned inside her. It was easier to wait for death than to contemplate never seeing Tork again. "They'll be fine," Dax said encouragingly. She seemed to sense what Sana felt. "I know," lied Sana, "but it is difficult for me." She took a deep breath and tried to force her attention away from thoughts of Tork. "Is there anything that we can do to keep busy?" she asked. "It will make the passage of time somewhat simpler if we can." "Of course there is," Dax answered. "In fact, I've got something I wanted to show you. Come with me back to the council chambers." Intrigued, Sana followed her new friend. When they were there, Dax called up one of the computer programs she had been working on. "This is the data that we downloaded from Tork's comp," she explained. "The logic is very different from the Federation computer codes, but since it is logic, our computers have been able to crack some of it." "And?" asked Sana, feeling excitement mount within her. "Does it have any significance?" "Yes," Dax replied. "Given your assertion that it contained astronomical data, I had the computer run a match with local star charts." On the screen, Sana saw a display that was obviously that of the Bajoran area of space. "It matches almost perfectly. The astronomers of the first Hive must have been geniuses because they scanned this data from your home system. There's only a bare indication of planets because they're very difficult to detect over such immense distances. But if I read the data correctly, this information is partly a map to be followed, aiming it at the Durain system." Frowning, Sana objected, "But that is not information. The Hive arrived there anyway. Of what use is it to know they aimed us to arrive where we did in fact arrive?" "Well, at least it shows that their original planning was sound," Dax replied. "I think you were correct in revering these members of the first Hive. Their achievements were astonishing. But it's not the aim that intrigues me. It's this." She gestured at the screen. "The target world in this data isn't given, of course. There is no way that the first Hive astronomers could have picked out an individual world from the distance of the Magellanic clouds. But there is a blueprint for a target world. The plan was to match it when the Hive drew close enough to Durain to start scanning for likely worlds." "But we know what was sought out," Sana protested. "Durain 4. "No," Dax informed her. "That is the world that was selected, true, but it isn't the world that this data calls for." "What do you mean?" Sana was completely puzzled now. "The first Hive data in this record indicates that the target world was not to be Durain 4 at all. The criteria listed here call for an uninhabited world, a world without any life on it whatsoever." Sana stared at the screen and then at Dax in utter confusion. "I do not understand. What does this mean?" "There's more," Dax told her. "Beyond that data, there are a long string of command codes that make very little sense to me at all. Perhaps together we can discover what they mean." Newly appointed Science Master Torvin stared around the command center in awe. He had worked here for years as Makarn's assistant. He knew its every function and what must be done at all times. But this was his first time in here as Hive Master, since Makarn was now on the second Hive. Even now it was moving farther away from the first Hive. The room was amazingly quiet, considering the work that was being done here. At their panels, the Hive's pilots were moving the immense vessel slowly through the Durain system, as they began to orient on the Bajoran system in preparation for their journey. The computers hummed quietly to themselves, processing the intricate calculations that such delicate maneuvers required. There were almost 100 workers here, all busily absorbed in their tasks. And each and every one of them was under his command. Tovin felt a surge of deep satisfaction as he surveyed his subjects. It was a great responsibility he had been handed, and he was determined that nothing at all should go wrong. "Master," called one of the technicians, "there is a problem." Mentally cursing his misfortune, Tovin moved to the female's side. "What is it?" he asked crossly. His first moments as science master, and already a problem. It did not augur well for the future. "The data from the astronomy section is confused," she replied, gesturing to her computer screens. "It is as if they are transmitting gibberish. We cannot set a course with such figures." Tovin sighed. What was going on up there? "I will settle it," he informed the technician. "Ignore the data for the moment and continue with the other calculations." He strode back down the length of the room to his raised observer's seat. Resting against it, he keyed on the communications unit. "Astronomy," he ordered the computer. A moment later, Bree's elderly face filled the small screen. "Bree," he snapped, "there seems to be a problem with your data." "There is no problem," she contradicted him. "You are receiving what we are transmitting." Tovin scowled. "You are transmitting nonsense?" he asked, astounded. "Yes, it seemed to be appropriate." Bree's snout twitched in amusement. "I hope it is causing you headaches." This made no sense at all. "It is not funny," Tovin snapped. "You are delaying the progress of the Hive." "Good," Bree replied. "That is our intention." It took a few seconds for the meaning of this to sink into Tovin's consciousness. Then he stared at the screen, appalled. "You are doing this deliberately?" he gasped. "You are betraying the great design?" Bree's face set in a hard glare. "The great design has betrayed us," she said. "We know that the world that was absorbed had living beings on it, and we know that there are more intelligent beings on the world that you Hive Masters have targeted next. We will not allow this." "You will not allow," Torvin repeated, stunned and furious. "You have no right to—" "We have every right," exclaimed Bree. "You have made us all murderers. The blood of an innocent race is on our hands, and it will not happen again. The entire astronomy section is with me in this, and we are spreading word of what has happened. We of the Hive will not tolerate what you wish us to become." She cut the communications, and the screen went blank. Torvin shook as he stared aghast at the screen. His first day on the job, and this had to happen. Moaning, he clutched his head between his hands. What was he to do? Nothing could have prepared him for such a catastrophe. Without their data, the Hive would not be able to continue, and he would have to answer for it. His fingers hovered over the screen's controls for several moments while he struggled within. He did not want to have to report failure to Grandmaster Dron, but he dared not delay telling him either. Finally, he stabbed down and screwed up all of his courage. "Get me Grandmaster Dron," he ordered the computer. A moment later, the screen lit up, and Dron scowled out at him. "Torvin, this had better be very important," he said. "I have many concerns at this time." "It is, Grandmaster," he gushed. "I am sorry to disturb you, but there is a serious problem with the astronomy department. They are transmitting nothing but gibberish to us, and deliberately so." "What do you mean?" demanded Dron. "They have decided that they do not approve of the great design, and are attempting to sabotage it. Without their data, we cannot move the Hive. They are disrupting everything." "It is not as bad as that," Dron said sternly. Security will handle their attempt at revolt. We may have to do without their aid for a while, that is all. But the data we need to move the Hive? Pleaded Torvin. How can we proceed without it? You do not have to, Dron said, sighing. If you check your computer records, you will find that Makon entered most of the necessary figures before he joined the new Hive. Simply call it up and follow that. It may be slightly off, but it will suffice for the journey to Bajor. Meanwhile, I will put a stop to this foolish revolt. Return to your work and get us back on progress. Of course, Grandmaster. Torvin snapped off the screen and scuttled back to the technician. Ignore all input from the astronomy sector, he ordered in a confident voice. He did not wish his underlings to know how frazzled he had been. The required data for moving the Hive has been stored in the computer files. Call it up and use that instead. There, that should settle that. Torvin was worried that he had left Dron with a bad impression, but there was no helping that. All he could do now was to overcome the bad start by ensuring that everything else ran smoothly. The objective would be reached. Bajor would be absorbed. Chapter 24. The Cardassian fleet closed the gap between them and the second Hive. Gavron watched the progress, alternating between his tactical display and the view on the main screen. He could feel his heart beating strongly, and the blood pumping through his veins. Battle would soon be joined. Closing, reported Tarvok. Estimating 3 units to first impact. Hammer section preparing to strike. Order them to fire when targets present themselves, Gavron instructed. The alien ships are in their double formation as before? Affirmative, Tarvok answered. Commanders report they are ready to engage. 2 units. It all came down to this in the end. The survival of the fittest. And the Cardassians had always been the fittest in any battle. They would win, as they always did. Now, breathed Gavron, hunched forward eagerly, waiting to see the first strike. The leader of Hammer Formation whipped toward the first 2 ships of the Hive fleet. Gavron knew what was coming, but he still tensed, waiting to see it. Fire streaked from the tips of the warship, streaking toward one of the alien ships. There it impacted on the target's shields, causing a brief surge in light. Their screens are holding, Tarvok announced. The attackers started to come around to fire again, and moved to avoid being trapped between the 2 ships and decimated, as the Bajoran vessels had been in the earlier battle. But the 2 Hive ships were surprisingly agile. They spun, accelerated, and started to close in on the Cardassian ship. A second Cardassian vessel cut across their bow, opening fire. This too splashed harmlessly off their shields. And then the battle was joined, and there was too much confusion to be able to concentrate on the larger picture. Gavron allowed the reports to wash over him as he focused on one small section after another. It was important to see how their tactics worked. In the earlier battle that the Caratan had witnessed, the Hive ships had worked in pairs, using monofilament netting as their weapon. The Cardassian captains all had orders not to be trapped by the alien ships in that fashion. Despite the order, some craft were too slow in response to evade being trapped. Gavron saw one of his ships dodge one attack, only to run into a second, as they accelerated away. The Cardassian ship fragmented into a cloud of components. The Cardassian attack, though, was doing more than holding its own. Taking a page from the enemy's tactics, 2 ships combined to attack a single enemy craft. Their combined firepower took time, but they could overload their target's shields and eventually destroy it. Of course, they had to watch out for further attacks as they did so. 5 ships lost, Tarvok reported. 4 of the enemy annihilated. Explosion followed explosion on the screen. His tactical display showed the maneuvering, and from time to time, lights would wink out. Green for the Cardassian forces, orange for the aliens. At the moment, everything looked fairly even. The number of ships deployed was almost identical, and they were trading losses. Of course, Gavron didn't expect this to last. His men were battle-trained veterans, while the forces of the Hive had only fought one battle before in their lives. They could not possibly hold against his superior soldiers, especially not using the tactics that they had before. 3 more of the enemy were taken out, sending the unmatched ships scurrying for... Wait a moment. Gavron stared at the tactical display. Despite the fact that they were now without their partners, the Hive ships were not retreating. On the contrary, the 3 single ships were now maneuvering to re-enter the fray. What did this mean? Had they evolved a new plan? That they had indeed became clear seconds later. Gavron had ordered his men to ignore Solo's ships after one of the pair had been destroyed, assuming that they would be out of the battle. What was going on? The 3 single craft, unbothered by the Cardassian attackers, swooped back into the battle. As they passed close to the Cardassian ships they had targeted, something was fired from each craft. It looked a little like a photon torpedo. "Evasive action!" Gavron roared. "Tell those captains to..." But his orders were too late to help. The torpedoes exploded before they hit their targets, which made very little sense, until 3 Cardassian warships simply fragmented in space. "What is happening?" yelled Gavron. "What did they do to my ships?" Tarvok merely shook his head and scanned the displays in front of him. "Unknown for the moment," he replied. "It's impossible to get sensor readings through all that weaponry. It'll take a few moments." Frustrated as he was, Gavron realized that Tarvok was doing his best. "Rescind my previous orders," he commanded. "Tell the captains to not ignore Solo ships any longer. Every enemy vessel is to be treated as a hostile and engaged." As he watched, 3 further green lights blinked off on his display. The unthinkable was happening. The enemy was starting to win this engagement, and he had no idea how they were doing it. "What will happen to me?" asked Tork. There was no mistaking the fear and concern in his voice. Without looking up from the controls, Sisko replied, "That is in the hands of the prophets, as the Bajorans would say. I can't tell you what will happen because I don't exactly know." Tork considered this for a moment. He didn't seem to mind the view of space through the runabout's window at all now, apparently having other things to worry about instead. "Then how do I know it will be real?" he asked. "It won't be real," Sisko answered. "The aliens are completely different from us. They may not even possess bodies as we know them. Instead, they adopt the guise of people from your mind. It will appear to you that you are standing in familiar places and conversing with people you know, but you will in fact be meeting with the entities who constructed the wormhole we'll be entering very shortly. They do not see time in quite the same way we do. To them it is one continual present. The concept of linear time, which seems natural to us, took them some getting used to, if they understand it even now. Everything you see and hear will be fragmented." "Then I do not see the point of this. If it is not real, why must I experience it?" "Think of it as a different perspective," Sisko suggested. "A very different perspective. The entities may not comprehend a lot about us, but they are highly intelligent and motivated. Sometimes they can see flaws in us that we never knew existed. Sometimes they reveal things about us that we can't see. At other times, they help to clarify our thinking. They should be able to clarify some of the confusion you're experiencing." Tork sighed. "I would very much like to have my confusion removed," he confessed. "It seems as if these past few days have been an assault on everything I have ever believed in. I do not know which way to turn." "Then let's hope that the entities can offer you some direction," Sisko said. "Now this next part may be disconcerting. We're about to enter the wormhole. It manifests itself quite spectacularly, so be ready for this." Tork nodded and stared out of the window in evident fascination. So much for his agoraphobia. He had apparently overcome it without too great a struggle. And then the runabout reached the critical threshold of the wormhole. In an explosion of light, it unfolded before them. No matter how often Sisko traversed it, the sight was never less than impressive. A huge whirlpool of colors seemed to draw the tiny ship into its funnel. Golds, silvers, reds, blues, yellows, and hues of color he could barely begin to imagine swirled about them as they plunged into the mouth of the effect. Flashing past them were bands and streaks of magentas, ochres, and umbers. Sparkles of light and color danced about them in a kaleidoscope of brilliance. Tork gasped, more from awe than from fear, and stared out at this tremendous display. "It is beautiful," he finally said. "It is that," agreed Sisko. He tapped in the commands to halt their forward vector. The ship's computer began station keeping. Otherwise, they would be sucked in and through the vortex. "Now, if you can tear your eyes away from the view, it's time for you to meet the entities." Reluctantly, Tork turned to follow Sisko to the casing that held the orb. Sisko bent and lifted the shell, placing it on the closest seat. Then he moved to stand behind it. This was not to be his experience. "Everything will be fine," he assured the alien. "Simply look at the orb and then concentrate. Nothing else. Then let whatever happens, happen." He gave the Hive Master a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. You may even enjoy the experience." "I hope that I will learn from it at the least," Tork answered. "I am ready." Sisko nodded and then gripped the edges of the two small doors on the front of the orb. "Here we go," he whispered, and then pulled. As the doors opened, the light from the orb streamed out, bathing Tork in its warm, comforting glow. Tork's eyes sparkled, and then he seemed to lapse into a trance. Sisko smiled ruefully, recalling his own experience with the orb and his meeting with the entities when he first arrived on Deep Space Nine 3 years earlier. Nothing had prepared him for what he had experienced, and he suspected that Tork was discovering just how unique this experience was. It seemed to Tork as if reality shifted. As he stared into the glow of the orb, the runabout dissolved around him. He found himself standing in nothingness. There was only whiteness about him. He felt neither heat nor cold. There seemed to be no directions, and nothing left in this universe with him. Yet he was not scared. He felt perfectly at ease. "Strange," a voice seemed to whisper about him. There was no visible source for the sound, but it sounded friendly. Different. And then he stood in the Hive. He was in his favorite spot in Park 19, where the river meandered past a small island. Here grew the beautiful blue Sami flowers that Sana loved so much. He was tempted to reach down and pick a handful, but stopped, thinking that this might not be allowed. He tried to remember what Sisko had said about this not being real, but it was hard to believe. It felt so much as it always did. There was the faint breeze from the air units stirring the air, and he could smell the light scent of the Sami in front of him. He could hear the rippling motion of the water beyond. "Logic," said a familiar, beloved voice. He turned to see Sana watching him, an oddly intent expression on her face. "It is a linear concept." "Sana," he said, amazed. "How did you get here?" And then he realized that it couldn't be her. It had to be one of those entities of which Sisko had spoken. "I am sorry. You startled me." "Logic," the alien Sana repeated. "A linear concept. Cause and effect. Clue and resolution. Beginning and end." "Yes," he agreed, confused. "It is a linear concept." "That which is," said a second voice, "and that which is to be, inferred from that which is." Tork saw an alien Hoseer approach. "Yes," Tork agreed again. That which follows comes from that which precedes. Interesting, the alien Sana said. Odd, added alien Hoseer. Cause and effect. He seemed to be savoring the sound of the words. Then, sharply, how do you know what you know? If Tork had been confused before this experience, it was nothing compared to how he felt now. I do not understand. That we can see, alien Sana agreed. But think and tell us, how do you know what you know? Tork struggled to make sense of the question. Partly by discovery, he said. What I find out for myself, I know. Partly from facts that are given to me by others. How do you know they know what they know? Asked alien Hoseer. They know it by the same process that I know things, Tork answered, hoping he was understanding the question correctly. Some things they have discovered, others have been passed down to them. The scene abruptly changed. Instead of standing in the park, Tork was in his own room. Facing him now was Harl. And others pass along what others have told them, the alien Harl asked. Yes, it is a line of knowledge that goes back millennia. Linear knowledge, said the alien Hoseer, who had simply materialized. Linear progression. Yes, agreed Tork. But how, asked the alien Sana, do you know that it is linear without interruption? I am sorry, Tork replied, confused. I do not understand what you are asking me. Linear, alien Sana repeated. It seemed to be their favorite word. 1, 2, 3. How do you know it is 1, 2, 3? And not simply 2, 3? Asked the Harl being. If it is linear, is it completely linear? This was not making things simpler for Tork. You want to know about authority, he asked. When things are passed along, their worth depends on their authority. Those who are accurate pass along accurate information. Our history, for example, comes from the people who made it. It has been passed along from generation to generation. He was suddenly back in the council chambers of Bajor. History, said an alien Sisko, passed along, 1, 2, 3. Those who experience the event pass it along. Exactly, agreed Tork. That way we know it is accurate. Only if the 1, 2, 3 are unbroken, said an alien Dax. The problem with linear, one must follow another. If one is missing, then the linear is shattered. Shattered? Asked Tork. Why couldn't these aliens simply tell him what they meant? This was too unsettling, conversing in this fashion. I do not comprehend. The alien Hoseer snorted. History, he said. One event follows another. One event causes another. One event influences another. It is linear. It is logical. Yes, agreed Tork. Behavior, said the alien Sana. That is not always logical. No, admitted Tork. Emotions can sway logic where behavior is concerned. Emotions can sway the linear, then, asked the Harl being. It can make the linear non-linear. It can introduce error, lies, deceit. Yes. Tork was finally starting to see the point of this discussion. It was a very roundabout way to reach the point, but he suddenly saw what the aliens were asking. You mean that information that is passed along in a linear fashion is capable of being corrupted and changed, sometimes by error and sometimes deliberately? Yes, agreed Sana's look-alike. The linear is subject to interruption. 1, 2, 4. Or to start at 4 and not 1. Or 3 and not 1, added the Hoseer entity. 3 and not 1. Tork almost fainted as he realized what the aliens were suggesting. No, he whispered. You can't mean that. He was standing back in the hive again, this time in the master's chambers. He stared at the conference table as the holographic image of Durain 4 was destroyed again and again as he watched. Destruction, said the alien Harl. It is the final linear event. There is no further linear beyond destruction. For us, the alien Sana added, there is no destruction because we are not linear. For you, the linear is all that you are. Durain was sucked dry again and again as he watched in horror. Is this 1 or is this 3? Asked Hoseer's image. 1 is a builder, a keeper of linearity. 3 is destruction, a beginner again. No, gasped Tork, trying not to accept what they were showing him. You are wrong. You must be. He was in the runabout with Sisko and Dax. It couldn't be the real runabout because there Dax was not present. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. We show you only what is in your mind, the alien Sisko said. This is not our mistake, if it is a mistake. This is what you have been keeping from yourself, added alien Dax. This is the logic, the linear, that you have striven to suppress. Tork felt giddy and sick to his heart. It cannot be, he insisted blindly. This is delusion, not logic. The logic is within, Sana's image told him. You must be true to yourself. You must be linear. You must follow 1, 2, 3. You must face reality, said an alien Drawn. There is image and reality, but you must distinguish them both. Reality, added the alien Sisko, can hide behind an image. It can disguise itself, but it is linear. The image can be removed. The image must be removed, the alien Sana insisted. And you must do it. It is important. If you do not do this, then the linear Bajor will be destroyed. It will become no more. He was back beside the stream in the park. Only the alien Sana was with him now. I am image, she told him. You know the real. But there are places where you have confused the image with the real. Be linear. Seek the truth. Understand. And then follow what you believe. Is that not the essence of being linear? Yes, he admitted. It is. If I know the truth and do not follow it, I am denying it. I am hiding it. I am becoming corrupt, as others have before me. He took a deep breath. It will not be easy. We have learned that many things are not easy, the image of Sana replied. When we first experienced Sisko, we discovered that there is linearity. Now we can speak of first meeting Sisko. Before, we could not. That is linear. It is not easy for us to be linear, but it is possible. She reached out a hand to touch his shell, and it was the touch of his Sana, his one to be. It is not easy for you to follow the truth, she added. It is not easy, he agreed, but it is possible. She smiled at him. You have grasped the truth, she said. May it illumine you. Now. He was back in the runabout. Tork knew this for a certainty. It didn't seem more real than his vision had, but the knowledge was sufficient. He blinked and then looked up from the orb to Sisko. I have seen, he said softly. Sisko closed the doors and the light from the orb was extinguished. Tork felt as if a part of him had been dimmed also. "That was quick," he said. "Just a few seconds. Did you get the clarification you desired?" "No," Tork answered honestly. "But I did receive the clarification that I needed. I now know what I have been hiding from myself. I know the truth. And that is that my people have been lied to, Captain." It was hard for him to admit this, but he knew that he had no option. He had to hold on to the truth. He had to be linear. That what we have believed for millennia has been an illusion. That our history is a sham. That we have become murderers through deceit. Chapter 25. It's a beautiful sight, isn't it, Nerys? Kira turned from the view of the city she had been studying and smiled sadly at Shakar. "Yes, it is." She bit at her lip uncertainly. "I was just thinking how well we'd done to rebuild so much, considering how little the Cardassians left us." Shakar moved to join her at the window. "I was thinking the same thing just a short while ago," he confessed. "We really have done pretty well, haven't we, for all the petty political fighting?" After a few silent moments, Kira asked, "Do you think it was worth it?" "Don't you?" Shakar gave her his old grin. "Nerys, you never doubted that fighting the Cardassians was the right thing. And when Kai Wynn and Vedek Bareil made that peace with the Cardassians, you supported it wholeheartedly. Why this disenchantment now?" "Because in a day or so it might all be gone." Kira gestured at the view. "All that work, and maybe for nothing." "It wasn't for nothing," Shakar said firmly. "It was for us, for our souls. Rebuilding our world gave us meaning and hope. Even if it is all destroyed by the Hive, it will have been more than worth it. Bajor has been reborn, Nerys." He smiled sadly. "You know, I actually got out of my office the other day and went to a concert." "You?" Kira was astonished. "Listening to music?" He laughed. "It does sound odd, doesn't it? But the government's been sponsoring art, and I thought I'd better see where some of that money was being spent. It was a concert by Theron. Have you heard of him?" Kira shook her head. "Well, he's an up-and-coming composer, I gather. Anyway, I sat through the whole evening and surprised myself by really enjoying it. If you ask my uneducated opinion, he's every bit as good a composer as Varani is." Shakar paused and then added, "If we still have such seeds of greatness, nothing we do is wasted, even if the world does end tomorrow." After another pause, Kira asked him, "What are our chances?" "Not good." Shakar sighed. "We've got ground-based phaser cannons set up, for example, but planet-based fire against something like the Hive will do barely more than a little damage. Thanks to Jarrow, we have a couple of small squadrons of fighters, but again, they'll be little more than irritants. I try to sound confident with the others, but I can't lie to you, Nerys. If the Hive comes, Bajor is doomed." "There's a cheery thought," muttered Kira. "And it's just the weather for gloom." The storm still raged outside. "We can only pray that Captain Sisko can avert the disaster," Shakar said. "It's our only hope." "If anyone can, he will," Kira said with conviction. Then she snorted. "Listen to me. Who'd have ever thought I'd say something like that? Remember how I used to curse the Federation for refusing to help us out in our war with the Cardassians?" "I remember a great number of things," Shakar answered. "You've changed a great deal, Nerys, since we fought together. It's an improvement, too. You're a stronger, better person for it. Kira smiled. Thanks. And... She broke off as her communicator sounded. Duty calls. She tapped it. Kira here. Dax, came the response. Can you come to the council chambers? I think we have something that you'll want to see. Bring Shakar, if he's with you. Did she detect a note of humor there? On our way, Kira replied, trading glances with the First Minister. They left his office on the run. What is happening? Repeated Gavron as he studied the tactical display. 2 more of his ships had collapsed following near misses by the enemy's torpedo-like weapons. I'm losing men, and I want to know why. Tarvok glanced up from his sensor panel nervously. It's still difficult to get any readings, he explained. But at a guess, I'd say that the aliens are using a variation of their earlier weapon. Monofilaments? Growled Gavron. But how? I'd say that the torpedoes are releasing a net of some kind, anchored to the launch device. When our ship moves, it cuts directly through the net and is destroyed. Gavron glared at the screens. That did make sense, and it also complicated the fight. Then we cannot ignore the solo fighters. But if they started trying to shoot down everything, the Hive would be able to escape. Order hammer and anvil wings to target any enemy craft. The rest of the fleet is to follow me. Prepare for an attack run on the Hive. I want all photon torpedoes primed and ready for launch. Acknowledged, Tarvok replied, and he began to relay the orders to the rest of the fleet. Studying his tactical, Gavron saw that he had 93 ships left. Hammer and anvil would be 27 of those. That left him 66 attackers. There would undoubtedly be further defenses that the Hive would throw at him, but some of those 66 ships should get through to inflict serious damage. Science officer, he called. Reporting, answered Ladra from her station. I assume you have been scanning the target. Of course, she acknowledged. I need to know the best possible targets on the Hive to strike, he informed her. Any weak areas, all the airlocks, the engine nacelles, anywhere they might be vulnerable to strikes. She nodded. A schematic came up on a small auxiliary screen in her chair arm. Several points were highlighted in flashing green. Launch bays, she informed him. The skin of the Hive is impervious to scanning, but those spots are where the attack ships were launched. Further indicators at the rear of the target lit up. These appear to be engine emplacements, she explained. I cannot determine how vulnerable they are, but logic dictates that they are a weak spot. Finally, several areas on the leading edges of the craft's 2 huge outspread wings. Collection points, she said. The vessel utilizes dust, debris, and gases it collects as fuel. If these are destroyed, then it will not be able to ingest materials. Excellent. He turned to Tarvok. Prepare to relay this information to the cruisers, he ordered. I will assign targets. On my command, the attack will commence. He worked through the list of strategic points swiftly, assigning his attack ships in teams of 5 to each sensitive area. Even given defensive fire, some of the ships should get through to strike their targets. He reserved one of the hangar bays for his own craft and escorts. Targeting details being transmitted, he said, with gruff satisfaction. The alien ships were still engaging hammer and anvil wings. Both sides were taking a severe maul. 2 more enemy ships were swallowed in flares of explosion, and one of his craft disintegrated as it was struck by another monofilament torpedo. There were still 38 of the enemy out there to 20 of his forces. His men were being decimated, but they would buy him time for this attack. Now, he growled. Signal the advance. Lock onto targets and prime weapons. The attack commences. What are you talking about? Asked Sisko. Tork's diatribe against his own race wasn't making much sense. It has all come together in my mind, replied Tork. It is time that we exited the wormhole. I must return to the Hive with the information that I now understand. I will explain as we travel. Nodding, Sisko set the controls to reverse their course. The thrusters kicked in, spinning the runabout, and then he engaged the drive. Once again, they sped past the mad whirlpool of color that raged about them. The entities clarified matters for you. Yes, explained Tork. They made me face what I suppose I had subconsciously already come to realize. I was blocking myself from accepting the truth, but I can no longer deny it. In my studies of the sacred writings, I had noted that the texts quoted by the 204th and 5th Hive were slightly different from those attributed to the 1st Hive. I had always assumed that this was due to faulty transmission of the writings because of the revolt of the 203rd Hive. In fact, it could not have been, because later Hives referred back correctly to the 1st Hive writings. I had made an error of assumption that has now become clear. The 1st Hive writings were altered by the 203rd Hive. What we believe to be the pure writings are in fact corrupted. Hoseer must have at least suspected this, because he asked me just before I left how I knew that the 203rd Hive's rebellion had failed. I knew it because the records said so. But the records have been altered. He shook his head. I had simply accepted the histories on faith, without using my intelligence to study them. We all do that, Sisko told him. We accept things without question because we believe them to be correct. Perhaps, agreed Tork. But in this case, the deceit was deadly. The runabout exited the wormhole in a final blaze of light. The passage constricted behind them, and then vanished. Sisko glanced at Tork. Where to? He asked. Deep Space Nine, Tork replied. I must contact the Hive. Captain, could you also recall Sana and Dax from Bajor? I know we are going to need their aid for what we must now do. Of course. Sisko patched into the Bajoran net. A moment later, he was looking at Kira's face. Major, return to DS9 with Dax and Sana. I don't care if you have to kidnap her to get her to come along. Just do it. Kira managed a smile. There's no need to be that extreme, she answered. Sana is dying to get back anyway. She and Dax have discovered something very significant, Captain. Save it for later, Sisko replied. I want you moving now. Understood. The screen went blank. What could they have found out? Sisko mused. I have a suspicion that they have discovered much the same information that I have, Tork replied. Sana had the data that Hoseer gave me before I departed the Hive. It is in a strange code, but I suspect it is the real information that the first Hive wished to pass on to future generations. Let's save this until everyone is together, suggested Sisko. Am I right in thinking that this might be a way to stop the Hive and save Bajor? Tork nodded. Yes, Captain. We may be able to restore the original programming to the Hive, but I do not think that it will be accomplished peacefully. There are too many powerful forces on the enemy side. The enemy side? Sisko echoed. Yes, Captain. Tork smiled. For what it is worth, we are definitely allies in your quest to stop the Hive. I pledge to do my utmost to see that Bajor survives. Well, Sisko muttered to himself, it looks like the prophets came through again. Bree sighed and then straightened up from her workstation. That is it, she announced to her colleagues. I have completed the text of our message, and it is ready to be transmitted to the Hive at large. Then do so, a voice called. It is not that simple, Bree replied. Access to the comps has been denied by a security override. Our act of rebellion has alerted Dran and his fellows to our knowledge. He is working to ensure that we are isolated and that we do not cause dissent before Bajor is absorbed. Then we must stop him, another said. Again, it is not that simple. Bree shook her head. These were intelligent people, but they simply didn't understand the nature of the political beast. Dron, through Master Raldar, controls the security forces. They, in turn, control what messages reach the Hive. We cannot take on the security forces. We would be in open rebellion, and likely to lose, she added realistically. We are not fighters. Then you are saying we can do nothing? That Dron will succeed? No, Bree answered. I am saying that we need a different approach to the problem. We are scientists. There must be a way for us to see around this problem and to overcome it. One of the younger members of her staff approached. I have some comp skills, she said hesitantly. If access to the comps is coded, I may be able to deduce the coding, if I may try. Of course. Bree moved aside to let the other work. That is an indication of what I mean. If Dron is being sneaky, then we had better learn how to be sneakier. She looked at them all with affection. After all, we are a lot smarter than they are we not? Before anyone could respond, there came a heavy blow on the door. Security! A voice called. Open up! No! One of the astronomers exclaimed, panicking. We cannot allow them in. We cannot keep them out, Bree contradicted him. They could burn down the door, which will only delay them. What do you propose? He demanded. That we surrender? No one is suggesting surrender. Bree hobbled across to the door and hit the entry plate. It irised open to reveal a half-dozen males beyond. Each carried a tingler weapon. Ah, come to harass us, have you? The leader moved inside and glared at her. Master Raldar has asked us to keep you confined and isolated, he replied. You are acting in a treasonous fashion, and that cannot be allowed to continue. Really? Bree peered at him intently. I know you. Are you not Dimas? Yes, the officer replied, scowling at her. I thought so. I was one of your tutors. She snorted. I always believed that you were an intelligent pupil. A shame that I was so wrong. I am not the one who is wrong, Dimas replied with dignity. I listen to the voices of the Hive Masters, which you do not. Well then, Bree told him. Did they tell you why we object to their voices? We do not need to know that, Dimas replied. Only that you do not listen. Bree snorted again. Oh, well spoken, she mocked. I can see that you are using your brains only to keep your ears apart. Next thing, you will be telling me that you are only obeying orders, and it does not matter what those orders are. Began Dimas, and then he caught himself. You are attempting to bait me to prevent me from doing my job. Yes, Bree agreed, surprising him. But I ask you also to hear what I have to say. You know me. Am I a dangerous or vicious person? No, Dimas said reluctantly. And if you were ordered to kill us all, would you obey without thinking? The Hive Masters would never order that, protested Dimas. It is unthinkable. They have already killed, Bree informed him. The blood of thousands of innocents is upon our hands, and if we do nothing, the blood of more will join it. She could see the struggle that was going on within Dimas. He had been trained by Raldar to obey orders without question, but she had instilled in all of her pupils the need to question everything. Which would win out here? What do you mean? Dimas asked finally. The planet that was absorbed had intelligent beings upon it, Bree explained. Even now, the Hive is in progress toward another inhabited world. These people will not leave it, so Dron aims to kill them and absorb their world anyway. Kill? Echoed Dimas. He looked stunned. Do you have proof for what you say? Plenty of proof, Bree informed him. She gestured to where the young female worked on the computer. "We are attempting to make it known to the Hive at large. Everyone must know that Dron is making all of us guilty of murder, but we cannot override the security codes." Dimas strode to the computer and gestured for the woman there to step aside. "I must review this data," he told her. "If what you say is true, then I can override the lockout and disseminate the information for you." Smiling, Bree turned to her scared companion. "You see?" she asked. "I knew that there had to be a way. Dron has seriously underestimated the Hive if he believes he can force us to become killers." Dron slammed his fist down on the conference table with fury. "Raldar!" he growled. "You idiot! Can nothing you do be trusted?" Nervously, the security master wrung his hands together. "I do not understand," he protested. "What have I done now?" "The security force that you sent to arrest Bree and the other astronomers," Dron snapped. "It has not done so. Worse, it appears that they have gone over to her side. Someone is systematically removing the security blocks from her computer and allowing her access to the comp networks." Raldar shook as he studied the information screen. "I do not understand," he moaned. "That has become abundantly clear," Dron informed him. "This is your last chance. Go to the astronomy section. Take with you only security men you trust implicitly. Stop these traitors now. Kill them if you must, but stop them." Chapter 26. Gavron watched his screens with deep satisfaction. Hammer and Anvil wings were continuing to engage the enemy craft. Both were suffering heavy losses, but inflicting the same. On the main screen, he caught the tail end of a fight, with one Cardassian cruiser raking a Hive ship with concentrated phaser fire. The alien ship attempted to pull free, but the Cardassian pilot was, of course, superb. End of Side 6.